Good. I'm going to say good morning, officially. Happy President's Day. And I decided because I was looking through some topics and I noticed that we've been having a lot of people ask me questions about vacant land. And there is some confusion also about buyer broker. So anything residential needs a buyer broker. Anything commercial doesn't need buyer broker agreements. So I'm just going to say, hey, Rachel, I've never actually seen you. Nice to
Hi, good morning.
meet you. Good to
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you.
nice to meet you. So Rachel, guys, as so you know, works with Maria. And there's Miss Maria. Hi, Maria. Okay. So at any rate, as I was saying, so to clarify, so every time I get a lot of questions on a topic, that's what I try to train on. So I've had a lot of questions about vacant land coming up, and there's a couple things I really want to hit on. I don't know if I have Alex Minato here because he does a lot of vacant land because he's a developer. So one of the situations that we had with Alex, and this is important, I want to bring it up. He actually was representing, it was a listing. He had the title company do all the legwork on the land and everything seemed great. We got a buyer on the land. We were pretty close to closing. And he got contacted by another person who said, why, what is going on with my property? Yep. One of those fraudulent cases. Now, what's bizarre, guys, is everything matched up from the title company's perspective. They had all the right IDs, they had everything. You know how we found out that it was the wrong person? Anybody want to take a guess? No guesses. You guys need to get on some steroids because this is good stuff. Uh, forewarned.
No, it's Monday, right?
Monday, President's Day, all sorts of stuff. You guys could come up with a lot of things, I'm sure. It was forewarned. So if you do not have the Forewarn app, which is free to you from Florida Realtors, please download it. You have to go to Florida Realtors to download your free version. You will download it from the App Store, obviously, but you have to go there first because it's normally like, I don't know, 350 bucks or something, but it is free for you. You're welcome. Yes, I was one of the 700 people that voted, but we all count. So at any rate, but you do have it for free. And what happened was the only way that we knew is the phone number from the person who was the seller didn't match. The new person who said they were the seller, that's how we saw it matched. The title company did not catch it. We had to turn it into the FBI, the FBI. It went as a big thing. Yeah. But that guy was so good with the fraud. I mean, I'm sure he's been scamming a lot of people. Very scary. So this has gone to new heights, the way people have been scamming on vacant land. So I just really want to say, if you are dealing in the vacant land area, you need to be ever vigilant. Here's another one. Do I have Janelli on? So Miss Janelli was representing the buyer. And Janelli was trying to put in the deposit, the escrow deposit, the first deposit. And she was trying to verify everything and do everything she could. And the escrow deposit bounced. It came back to them.
Yeah.
Are you on, Janelli? No, I thought
I'm
you.
sorry, what'd you say? Okay, thanks.
Okay. So that's when we found out it was a scam because the guy that she called, the listing agent, said, oh, no problem. That happens. Just here's another company to put it with. What? So in that instance, we had to turn them in as well. They were fraudulent with the land. They were trying to take people's escrow deposits. Insane. So this is happening buy side, sell side, all over the place. More scams today in land than any other area, I will tell you. So I just want you to be, if you're dealing in vacant land, ever vigilant. And Forewarn has really become a great tool because that phone number, you cannot fake where the phone number matches. That's one of the things. You can fake a real great fake ID. You can fake so many things. You can get people's credentials, but you can't change the phone number, right? I mean, I guess you could spoof it, but they haven't gotten that savvy yet. I mean, maybe they will. So at any rate, I just want to just again say, if you don't have Forewarn, go ahead and get it. All right. Unless anyone wants to share a horror story, we're going to go ahead and move forward. And yes,
Yeah, 1 second. Do you know how to connect the
Okay, so here we are. We're going to look at two things. I want to look at the listing agreement and I want us to look at the contract. Okay, now these are the red line changes that they had made back at the end of 2024, in case there's some question about the changes that had been made, because they did make them as well to the vacant land in regards to the NAR settlement. So we're going to go through them. If anybody has questions, please unmute yourself and ask. Or Linda, feel free to speak up, because it's me and Linda having a party over here because she's the only one who decided that it was a beautiful day to come on in. She did her hair. She looks lovely. Yeah, she looks great. Okay. Any rate, so this is the redlined copy. Now we obviously have the latest and greatest in our dot loop. And of course, everything is in Florida Interactive Forms. Does everybody know Florida Interactive Forms? I don't have to, I'm just going to do it because just in case anyone, because I do get that question, where would I find? So I want you all to see, if you ever are looking for a form, an addenda, whatever you're in, you go to templates. Right here, Florida Interactive Forms. That is the actual feed from Florida Realtors Legal Bar. Okay. Every form ever created is here. And so if you're looking for anything on vacant land, it's going to be here. So vacant land disclosure statement, vacant land listing agreement. Now I just started to type it. Backup contract for vacant land. They have that. Kickout clause for vacant land. They have that. Homeowners Association addenda for vacant land. They have that too. So these are the things people are like, well, what do they have for vacant land? They have a lot, but you don't want to write too much because the more you write, the less you find. Does that make sense? Because you have to actually type it exactly. So that's why I just started writing VAC, just as less is more when you're doing this. So when people say, well, what kinds of things do they have for vacant land? Well, you have the listing agreement, you have the contract, right? Of course, but you also have a special vacant land disclosure statement. Let's just take a little quick peek at that. This is what's going on. Are there claims, assessments? What are the uses of the land, the survey, the environment? This is something, the flood, the condition of the property, utilities. This is the disclosure statement that the seller would have to put in there if they own the land. Now, sometimes people have no clue because they've had it for years and they've never done anything with it. Here's a pop quiz. Ready? Get ready to answer. It's going to be worth 20. Let's say someone, and we've seen this, guys, this has come up in our office. Let's say someone bought this land years and years ago, maybe came through the family, and now they want to sell it, but there's no egress or egress. It's just this little parcel. Can they sell that in the MLS?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Max. You are 100% right. You get the 20 points. Unless you can access that property, you cannot sell that in the MLS. Now, could they try to get variances from all their neighbors to try to get access to their property? Sure. God knows how long that would take, how much it would cost, how many counties that they would have, cities that they'd have to go to at that point, because you never know where the property's held, right? That kind of thing. Could it be done? Absolutely. Is it worthwhile? Probably not, but you never know, right? But this is not something for us to certainly, talk to them about. We can just simply tell someone, if someone comes to you and says, I want you to sell my property, and you see there is no access to their property, we cannot put that in the MLS. These are things you need to understand about land, right? Also, if there is someone has joint access to that property, but they really don't. They're utilizing that property, but they don't have access to that property. You're going to have a fight over who owns that land. We have had that. Susan Hampshire's had that so many times. That has held up closing because now there's well, what do they call it? It's an easement, but it's not really an easement. It's what is that word? When it's sort of like a known easement, but it's never been put in the county record. So people have been utilizing this property as a way to access their property, but they never actually got an easement. So we have had that where they're not able to sell their land because another parcel, another property owner's been using this as their easement.
Is that a prescriptive road?
That wasn't the word they use. It's like, I forget the name of it. Maria, do you know? It's like, Oh God, it's got a real specific name, but basically it means like it's almost like a squatter, like you knew about it, but you should have known about it, but you don't know about it, but it's not really recorded with the county. But at any rate, these things happen in land more than anywhere else. And so these are the things you need to know about. So when you're looking at this type of disclosure, right? Are there any assessments, pending legal actions, claims, right? There could be a claim on that land. You got to know. Now, they may or may not know, right? Are there violations on the land? Are there any eminent domain proceedings? Guys, there are a lot of parcels of land that I have found that have eminent no domain proceedings going on because the counties want to widen their roads, because they need to put schools there. So there's a lot of things that you need to know about. So you have to be careful when somebody just says, oh, I have a parcel of land, I just want to sell it. If they know nothing about it, they're not from the area. These are things they need to really take a look at. Now, you could just say no, but guess what? You try to sell it, and then there is some kind of eminent domain situation because they're building a school nearby. You got to look into all this stuff because it will throw off your sale. I mean, Max, I'm sure you've gone through all of this stuff, but when you're building.
I have. Yep,
Right.
yep, yep, yep.
Any restrictions? Here's a good one. This is super important to know when you're dealing in land. And I'm sure, Max, you have a story, but I'm going to share this one very quickly. We had a guy who came to us. He had about 12 acres. I may be wrong on the acreage, right in the middle of Hunter's Creek. Now, you all know Hunter's Creek. That's like a well-developed area. You could totally build over there. He bought it a long time ago. He got the zoning changed because he wanted to build a church. This had great density. You could have built a subdivision. It really was a PUD before. He got it zoned with a special zoning, changed to a church so that he didn't have to do the tax exemption, right? So that way he can now do a church. Well, long story short, he can get the money, right? So now he wants to sell it. He wants to sell it back as a PUD, right? Well, guess what happened? A long time has passed since he bought this land. Lots of communities all built up around it. Well, the county or the city, whatever the actual jurisdiction was there, they gave away all the density to all of the other communities. So even though he had 12 acres, he could only build two things because all density had been given to all the other projects around him. So even if you changed it to PUD, it didn't matter. Planned urban development is a PUD, just in case anyone didn't know on the call. You could only build 2 units. So there was no point in changing the special exemption. You can't build more than 2 units. So you see what I'm saying? There's a lot of things. If you guys get into vacant land, if you're not familiar with vacant land, zoning, density, there's so many things. And that's why if someone comes to you with a piece of vacant land and you're not familiar in that area, surveys. Here's another big thing. When did you have it surveyed? What has been built around it since you surveyed that property? Because if 7 years have passed and people have built onto that land that was your land, that's not your land anymore. Now it's become their land. That's what happens. So for example, if you have a big parcel of land, you didn't pay attention because you were somewhere else, and the neighbor has encroached on your land and they've built a fence and then they built further and they built further. Well, you can't just come along 10 years later and say, oh, I want that back. Because it's been built for over 10 years, guess what? It's now their land. So even though you had a survey 10 years ago that said that was your property, it is no longer your property. So here's the interesting thing that you have to understand. So if somebody comes to you and it's like, but look, my survey says this, don't get involved in these conversations. You have to understand, you need to send them to an attorney. You need to send them to the right people. You are not the right person to explain these kinds of things because this is legalities where they've actually lost their property. Everybody clear on that? I'm sure, Max, you've dealt with that too.
Yep. And also another thing is if part of the land touches a lake, and I mean like a named lake, you have riparian rights.
Yep, good one.
And with riparian rights, that could interfere with zoning and density with riparian rights.
Absolutely. And sometimes on the survey, it shows that they have like 5 acres, but half of the acreage could be in the water, right?
Right.
So it doesn't mean it's buildable 5 acres, right? And then they can tell you, the EPA comes and says, well, you can't even touch that because you have to maintain the natural fauna and flora. So that's a whole nother thing. So you own it, but now you have to maintain it to the natural fauna and flora. So really,
To the high water level mark.
exactly. And so when you want to build a dock, you have to go above and beyond all that. So there's a lot that goes into land, guys. I just want you to be very aware if you're dealing with vacant land. That's why here you go into environmental. Let's talk about that. Are you aware of any substance, materials, pollutants, contaminants? Guess what? If you bought something that, for example, had a leased property on it or a commercial property or something, let's say, God forbid, a printing thing on it or a cleaner, oh my God. And that you bought it, you didn't realize that 2 tenants before had a cleaner in it, right? And then that cleaning solution got into the water. Guess whose job it is now to pay to clean up the water? Yours, because you
Yours.
bought it. So this is where that's a little commercial mixed with vacant land, but this is where all of this stuff can get. Oh, sometimes people buy vacant land, but they have old wells that have been stuck in there, and those old wells can get contaminated and they can contaminate the water. So these are all things I just want you to be aware of. These, like the remediation of cleaning up this stuff, it's a mess. Look at this, abandoned wells. See, that's what they're talking about right there. That stuff can be a mess. So you really have to make sure, especially if you're doing farmland. We have Maddie on here. Maddie, you understand. If you had a farm, you had maybe all sorts of things for your farm. You had old wells. This is really old property. They buried a ton of stuff. I mean, God knows what they buried, right? That could be pollutants and contamination that when you sell that property, that goes on to the next person of their ownership. So you know, this is very important that they try to give you all of the information that they can, because the number one thing is if they don't disclose and they're found to have known about it, that's the number one thing they're going to get sued for. Okay.
On large parcels of land, typically, you might find kerosene tanks that have been
Oh,
buried there,
good one.
forever. And
That's a good one.
Mhm.
Good one. So, and then condition of property, have any soil tests been performed? Now, remember, we're going to talk about diligence, right? Due diligence, you have 3 different levels of diligence, and that's really where the soil tests would come in. Most people have not, but I'm going to tell you, compacted soil, whether the soil percolates. I mean, a lot of you don't probably know what that means. When our rain comes down here, it doesn't drizzle, guys. I think you've all seen what our rain does here. It's like a monsoon. It goes down so fast. And if our soil, which in Windermere specifically does not percolate well, even in Winter Garden, Bronson's Landing was a mess. That soil doesn't perk. Element, that community that's built right on Lake Butler Boulevard, I can tell you that's why the builder excluded the soil percolation from, so the soil has been excluded from their warranty. Interestingly enough, Phil did that. It's very clever, Phil. But the reason he did that was because that soil doesn't perk there. So what that means is when the water comes down super fast, you're going to get flooding. And when you have flooding, it could back up into your pool. It could back up, especially if you're on the water. That could cause, especially if it's like a hurricane type conditions. And they didn't want to have to worry about maintaining that for warranty issues. Well, if you're buying a property that's $3-4 million, I mean, because we have Berta buying in there with her customers. I was like, no way. You got to definitely get that included in there because that percolation will be a mess. Bronson's Landing, we had to redo half of that community 2 years after people closed because that percolation caused such a problem with the inner barrier that it was backing up into people's pools. And we didn't have to do it, but we did it because of our reputation. We regraded for the 3rd time because we had 3 different grading plans to try to fix that percolation problem. You can't, the soil's terrible. It's just how you're trying to grade the water so that it won't build back up when it comes down like that. The only way you can change percolation is change your soil, and good luck. If it's a whole area like that, you can't bring in all topsoil. That would be a fortune. So that's where you got to understand. And that's what they're talking about with the soil and here. That's what's super important. And sinkholes. Maddie, you have a whole area community you were saying that has sinkholes. What was that area?
That's over on the northwest side, the preserve. But here in Ocala, we have the vein, actually the aquifer that runs under us. So southwest, there's a lot of communities that have been plagued with sinkholes. So
See,
yes,
guys, if you don't know Ocala and you start buying or selling in Ocala and you're not familiar with that, actually, we just had one, I don't know if Ariana's on, actually it was in Tampa, where they tried to cover up the fact that there was a sinkhole. The engineer that was did a flip on it. And because if you let the insurance company know that there's a sinkhole and they try to remediate it and they call it a sinkhole, you will never sell that property for near value, period, end of story. So they do everything they can to try not to say that. But guess what? You have a sinkhole once. You think you'll have it again?
Of course.
So I wouldn't buy a single area. So these are things you have to understand. These are true issues. So, and then of course, utilities is important. Listen, if you say that it's got, a well and it doesn't, or if you say that it's it's county utilities and it's not, I mean, these are things that could be a real problem. So you've got to be, and actually sometimes you say it has access to public and it can't have access to public because there's no tie-ins. So that's another thing. Sometimes public cannot even come for a tie-in. So you got to understand that stuff too. So this is what I'm saying. If you're going to get involved in vacant land, you've got to be familiar with all of these things. And you don't want some seller coming in here and not filling this in. Because if they
Not
don't,
all wells have water, by the way.
not all wells have water.
Correct. Could
So
be a
what do you-
dry well that went dry.
Oh, so then you got to go put another one in. That's a good point.
Right.
So these are all super wells, septic tanks. These are all huge issues that you have to really make sure you understand and you're getting the seller to disclose. If you're the listing agent and the buyer, if the buyer's buying it, they understand what the potential is that they are getting it inspected. So everybody clear, even on vacant land, even if there's really no encumbrances or any kind of improvements on that land, you still need to know all of this stuff because if they want to build, the other thing that you have to understand is buildable lot, right? For example, we have property in Naples, 5 acres. And the EPA came and said, well, because of conservation, you can only build 1 acre out. 1 acre on 5 acres. Guys, that's insane. So because of the community, they allow to be at the minimum of 2 acre lots. So we can actually subdivide that. So if we subdivide it, now you can have 2 acres. So 2 acres, 1 acre buildable lots. That used to be 5 acres of buildable land. Now, you might have to do some mitigation because sometimes it does get a little wet, but could you imagine? So something that used to be 5 acres of buildable land is now gone down to 1 with the possible potential of 2, which you have to subdivide. This is huge stuff that you have to understand because counties can change the value of the land by doing stuff like that. Interesting. So this is all stuff that I want you to understand. If you're dealing with land, that's why if you are the listing agent, you need to get on the phone and talk to the zoning department. And you need to get on the phone and understand, is it the county, is the city, whoever it is, what is the land use? What is the future land use? You have to understand how that land is. Is it in a flood zone? Is part of it in a flood zone? Like there's very important stuff that if you're going to represent this property, you're not going to be the expert. You definitely got to make them hire engineers and you're not doing anything with the diligence, but you need to understand the land. Does that make sense? When people ask you questions, you can't be like, oh, talk to the seller. No, you have to understand what's going on. You don't want to be you want to quote, the county has said this, you're not going to be the one giving the information as if you're the knower of all things. You're going to be the passer of information, but you need to understand what's happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Under B, by the way, you have abandoned wells right here.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Abandoned wells, gotta love that one too. And all these things can cause pollutants in the soil as well. So these are all the things that sometimes you have to get taken out. Now, we talked about backup contracts, guys. You have a backup contract as well in vacant land. So it's the same type of contract situation. If you can't just say, okay, sure, you're going to be my backup. That's not really a backup, right? You actually have to have the same process as you would in a regular contract, right? Same thing with a kickout clause. Just like in a regular contract, we could do a kickout clause. You can do the same thing in vacant land. But these are pertinent right to the same thing as the vacant land contract. You don't use the residential one or the regular as is one, you would use the kickout clause for vacant land. Does that make sense? Because it matches the vacant land contract. So both of those things are right here, the same thing. The homeowners association addenda for vacant land contract. This is important. If there is a homeowners association and you're selling the vacant land, same thing is a first right of refusal. Like you have to understand all of these things, right? You guys understand this. Is there a mandatory association that they have to be part of, right? If they purchase in this community, are they going to be required to be a member of it? Or do they have to pay any assessments? Is there a capital contribution? This is important. And for example, Bella Colina, when they first sold that under the tent with Ginn selling the sizzle first for like 300,000, imagine, you had to build or sell within 3 years. So sometimes they have things like that. So you have to understand the rules within the community as well. They could have rules like that. You can buy the vacant land, but you can't hold it forever. You have to build or sell within 3 years, or you have to use certain builders, right? You have to understand all of those things if you're building within a community. Does everybody
But you
understand?
got a helicopter ride, Carrie. Come on,
Well, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Actually, if you bought in that first phase, you did great. If you bought in the second or third round, you could have got caught. So, but yeah.
Back in the fun days.
Yeah, the good old days, the Gin Sizzle. By the way, Bella Colina Plaza, so exciting. Did you all see we have Floor and Decor in there now? Wasn't quite Bloomies, but Floor and Decor made it.
I mean, better than Dollar General.
We still have time. So anyway, moving on. I digress. Okay. And so these are things that y'all want to make sure you see. Now, let's go back into the listing agreement. So this is very similar, guys, just so we're clear, as to a regular listing agreement. I'm just going to close this out for now. But let's just go through it just in case. It is still an exclusive right to sell. By the way, we only do exclusive rights to sell, right? It begins and terminates on. We could do the same thing with clear cooperation, right? Where we can put it out there and not worry about it. Now, commercial property does not pertain to clear cooperation. Residential does. This is where vacant land gets confusing, because if your vacant land is commercial, clear cooperation and also buyer broker agreements really don't matter, right? However, if it's residential, it's all part of the buyer broker agreements. It's all part of clear cooperation. So I'm just going to say, if you have vacant land, just follow the rules of everything. It's just the simplest way to do it. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, here you go. Obviously, it's very similar. Street address. If there are any personal property that is being conveyed, are there storage sheds? Is there plumbing? Is there tanks? Is there irrigation systems on there? Is there gates? What is coming with this property? Is anything already encumbering? Is there anything already improved on the property? This is what you want to say, right? Maybe there's some barns on there. Okay.
Sometimes there's no street address.
Sometimes there's no street address, and if there's not, you just put the legal description, right? Because if it hasn't already been put in to build on it yet, you won't have a street address. Very true story. But guys, sometimes there's like a mobile home. A mobile home, can we ask you, can we sell mobile homes? The
No.
answer- no, thank you, Maria. We do not sell moving vehicles. Okay, that is left for car dealers. We are not in the auto industry. So we cannot sell anything on wheels. Okay, we can only sell something on a foundation, which is why we can sell a manufactured home. God help us. So we cannot sell a mobile home, but a mobile home could be a thing that is on the property, like a mailbox or a, fence or, that can go with the property, like chattel, right? But it is not how you list it. You can't list a property like a single family home in a residential section because there's a mobile home. It doesn't work like that. I get that question a lot. Manufactured, yes, because it's a structure, because there's a foundation-ish, right? Let's hope, right? Hope there's some hurricane ties that keep you in when the wind comes a-blowing. But a mobile home, no, if you drive it, it doesn't count, right? If you drive it, it goes to the auto industry. We all good with that one?
How about a tiny home?
Well, a tiny home is usually a container that actually has a foundation. So those
They
would work.
changed the price to 520 now. It's down.
So a tiny home would work. We love tiny homes because oftentimes, as a matter of fact, in Winter Park, several years ago, I don't really remember when, they did Veterans Park, I can't remember the exact name, where they created a whole little community of tiny homes that they put on foundations and they made them for veterans. They're beautiful. It was a great project. And actually, we're looking forward to doing something similar like that with government affairs. So tiny homes can be fabulous. They can be put in with foundations. They can have hurricane ties. People can live in them. They can withstand our weather here and our code, but a mobile home cannot because you drive it. There's wheels, there's rubber, no good. Everybody good on that? Okay, same concept. Is it occupied or is it not? Well, how would land be occupied? Well, is there some kind of a shed or something on there that people live in, right? Price and terms, this is very similar. What is the price? Is there cash, conventional, USDA? USDA is still a big thing in vacant land. I will tell you, there are still areas. I know in Ocala, we can still do USDA. There's some areas in Lake County, we can still do USDA. USDA is the 100% financing in areas that still have enough rural land. Not much in Orange County, I can tell you that, but there are still areas where USDA is a thing. Seller financing, again, this is all exactly the same as in our regular listing agreement. Seller expenses, the seller will pay a mortgage discount or closing costs or concessions not to exceed any other expenses the seller agrees to pay in connection with the transaction. This is the exact same thing in our listing agreement. This is if you want to say we're going to give a dollar amount, not a percentage, to buyer concessions. However, the buyer chooses to use that, if they want to use it for their agent's commission or if they want to use it for closing costs, it doesn't matter, right? It's whatever the buyer chooses to use it for. Exactly the same as our regular residential, home listing contract. The broker agrees to use diligent and continued effort to sell the property until sales contract is pending. The broker's office policy is to cooperate with all other brokers except when not in the seller's best interest. Again, exactly the same. The multiple listing services is exactly the same as the other one. Now, advertising the property deems advisable, including advertising on the internet unless they opt out. Again, exactly the same. Place transaction signs, for sale signs, exactly the same. Obtain information regarding the mortgage. I hate that, but anyway, it's the same. Provide objective comparative market analysis, information to potential buyers, the same. Use a lockbox or gate code. Obviously, that's only applicable if there's a gate on the land, right? You're not going to do that if there is no gate. Now, sellers advised to secure all valuables. So obviously, this is totally right out of our regular listing agreement. And that would only make sense if there was improvements on the land, right? Withhold verbal offers. I hope so. Withhold all offers once the seller accepts the sale. Well, if you do that, you don't get backup offers, right? So it's exactly the same. We act as a transaction broker, totally the same. Virtual offices, all of this is the same. So whether the seller authorizes the automated value, again, you're going to look to see what Zillow, what Realtor.com is showing for the price of that land. If it's showing a better price than you're putting it out for, allow it, right? If it's showing less, you want to say they do not authorize it. Same thing. We don't care if you want to allow the comments or not. That's your choice. Sellers' obligations and representations. This is all the same. They're going to cooperate with the broker to allow them to transfer the property. They're going to provide accurate information. And then this is where it changes a little different. So, which the seller may be aware, including, but not limited to, there's access or supply of water, sewer, or septic, problems with drainage, grading or soil stability, environmental hazards, commercial or industrial nuisances, noise, smoke, odor, utility or other easements, shared driveways, that's a problem, encroachments from adjacent properties, zoning, wetland, flood hazards, tenancies, cemetery grave sites, run, hide, do not list that, abandoned wells, underground storage tanks, presence of protected species, good luck with that, nests of protected species, hide. So all of this is totally applicable only to vacant land. And I would say most of those things you want to run and hide from anyway. Okay, so broker provides access to the property, make the property available for the broker to show during reasonable times, then inform the broker before they lease or mortgage it or encumber it in any way. And then, of course, they're going to hold us harmless, which is exactly right. They're going to use a lockbox or gate code if there is a need for that. The existence of undisclosed material facts about the property, a court or arbitration decision that the broker who was not compensated in connection with the transaction is entitled to compensation from the broker. And this is what they're indemnifying us from, okay? Which is very similar, minor changes to the regular contract that we use every day. Obviously, FERPTA is the same. Make all legally required disclosures, including all facts that materially affect the property's value that are not readily observable or known to the buyer. That is exactly the same right under the other listing contract, but that is what the actual requirement by the state of Florida is, right? And then, of course, same thing, they will consult appropriate professionals. So that means, guys, if someone who pretends to be a developer, and that's what we see. Oh, I want to be a developer. I think I know everything, but they want you to do all their due diligence. No, that is not your job. Even if you come from development, you don't do that. That should be the job of an engineer. That should be the job of whoever's going to build on it, but that is not our job. Do not take that on because that is you assuming tons of liability that you should have nothing to do with. Does that make sense? And then it goes into the same exact thing here. You see this? All this red, exactly the same as our other. Compensation. Again, the A is the total purchase, total amount that they're going to give us of the purchase. So if we're handling both sides, that means that they're going to select 10A. That means they're going to allow us to offer to the sell side, same thing, the buy side, a percentage. Then that would be, let's say they're doing 3 and 3 to us, then this would be 6, right? And then if they say, well, we don't want to give anything, so it's just 3 up here. Does that make sense? It's exactly the same as our regular listing agreement. So if you're looking at a vacant land contract and it does not look exactly like this, you're looking at an old one. So I saw something last week that did not have this. I don't know where you got that vacant land contract. It was old. The vacant land contract looks exactly like the vacant land listing agreement looks exactly like the regular residential listing agreement. All right. Any questions on that? The conditional termination, guys, exactly the same. Do I ever cancel a listing? Anybody? Anyone want to play with that? No, I don't. No. On a very rare case, I might conditionally withdraw for the correct reason, which means can they sell it while they're under the same terms of our listing agreement?
No,
Thank you. Thank you, Max. No, you cannot. So
that's 20 extra.
That's right. They pay us $1,500 to set up the listing, whatever you wrote in here for your cancellation fee. And then they have to just leave it off the market, can't do anything with it until the end of our listing agreement. Why would they do that? I don't know. But you know, dispute resolution, this is exactly the same. If they want to sign, if someone's like, I am not going to sign dispute resolution, I am not going to agree to go and mediate. Listen, we're not going to say you have to mediate. So you don't want to mediate. That means they go right into arbitration, which means that they're just going to go to a lawsuit. They can do that. We're not going to say you have to do this, but obviously it's always cheaper and better to mediate before trying to go to lawsuit. But that's what this is about, this paragraph here, okay? And then the miscellaneous is the same thing. That's making it binding upon their heirs, blah, 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 blah. Okay, all of that is, the rest is exactly the same. Any questions about the vacant land listing agreement? Okay, so it's really the exact same thing with the difference of the fact that does it come with any things on top of the property, in the property, what's on the property? Do you know about anything perhaps that we need to know about the property? And realistically, you know, everything else is the same. Okay, now let's look at the vacant land contract. There's a lot of questions I get on this. So obviously we know the buyer and the seller. One time I've gotten this question a lot, so I'm just going to say it again, just for the sake of saying it. Whether it's the buyer or the seller, let's say there is a company. The company is ABC Holdings. The person who signs it cannot be ABC Holdings. It has to be an individual or multiple individuals. Whoever the signatory for the company is, that's who signs it. So then we also need in the file from Sunbiz, or if it's a trust, the deed, the trust documents, who the signatories for that, either the trust or the LLC or the incorporation, whoever the signatories for the appropriate entity is. Does that make sense? Because this cannot be ABC Holdings. I have seen that. I will kick it back every time. ABC Holdings cannot be a signatory. An entity cannot sign. It has to be an individual signing. So yes, up here, it will say, and then I personally prefer, if you can put over here in the back, Linda O'Grady is the signatory for ABC Holdings.
Or managing
Makes
member.
sense. Managing member, well, it depends whatever the entity is, right? Is it an LLC? Is it an incorporation?
Right.
Is it a deed? What is it? Is it a family trust? Whatever.
Right.
But just put what it is and who they are under additional terms, and that way everybody's clear, or if there's multiple people, so we know who's signing. Does that make sense? Everybody clear on that? I've gotten that a couple times. And then I've also seen the company signing, which is so interesting because the company can't sign. Okay. So this contract is contingent on the buyer. So either they're going to pay cash. So this is what's interesting. Oh, wait, I jumped ahead. Sorry. The legal description. Sometimes there's an address, sometimes there's not, right? Because if they haven't done anything with it, they've never, we may not have an address, may not be platted yet. So we just put the legal description. Obviously, we know how to get all that. The purchase price right there. The escrow right there. Same thing. Initial deposit. Again, I am going to tell you, please, tons of escrow disputes. I highly recommend put a lower initial and then an additional after the due diligence period, especially in vacant land, because there's so many frauds going on. Is there a question? So I would put less money down initially, and then if it's a 30-day, 60-day, whatever the due diligence period, put additional money after that, right? That's the bigger money, because it's better to chance less money here in case the seller decides for whatever reason they don't want to give your money back. Because remember that title companies are not party to this contract, and every title company has their own procedure for handling escrow dispute, which many of them is figure it out yourself. I love that procedure. Isn't that fun? Good luck. Have fun. And that's a real problem. So, I'm just going to say it's better to risk less. Okay. So that's why you can put in here after you can put how many days. That would be days after the diligence period. Okay. And then the total financing, again, I'd write that number, not the percentage. Balance to close is however money you need left to equal that purchase price. We already know that, right? And then let's go here. Complete only if the purchase will be determined based on the unit cost. So this is where it's different when you're dealing with land. So sometimes it's based on per lot, sometimes it's based on acres, sometimes it's based on square foot. So this is where you can specify how you came up with the purchase price. The purchase price will be based upon, okay? And this is how you came up with the calculation. Sometimes I see Susan do this a lot because it's based upon the survey. Because they think based on the original seller survey, let's say they're using acres, right? It's a large parcel based on these acres. It's based on this price per acre. And then they get the survey done and they're off. Now the price changes based upon the actual new survey. So this is why a lot of times in vacant land, this becomes a very important section. Does that make sense? So it depends on what you're dealing with. Is it, Maddie, do you use that often, or have you done a lot of large parcels?
I have, but I normally, as far as, I don't know what your opinion is as far as this is concerned, but a lot of times they want to wait on the survey. And I obviously that's up to them, but
so they wait on the
if they
survey
want
until
the
they put it in
closing,
contract?
they wait on the survey until they have it in contract, correct? But my question to you as far as that's concerned is, a lot of times I'll deal with people that will want to close very quickly, and obviously surveys, they take time. So
Forever.
what are what are your thoughts as far as that's concerned? Because some people are just like, we just want the land, and and I'm like, that's not what I recommend, but if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do.
So they want to buy it without the survey?
Correct.
I would get them to sign a hold harmless, because remember, if that person's owned that land for a very long time, who knows? Maybe other people have encumbered it since. Maybe they're not actually buying what they think they're buying. So
Okay.
that buyer better sign a hold harmless that says, we recommend they have a survey, we recommend that they have inspections and do due diligence, because let's say they buy it, then they find out half of it's encumbered, right? Or whatever, they can't do
Right.
what they want to do. They're going to come after you and say, how'd you let me do that?
Okay. Now, when you say to hold harmless, is that just an addendum? Is there
Yes.
an actual document
Yeah.
that says
No.
that?
Well, first of all, you're going to make them sign the Premier Sotheby's, recommendations and disclosures, one. But then we're going to
Yes.
actually draw up a hold harmless. There is a hold harmless in Florida interactive forms, which they have one that the Florida Bar has created.
Okay.
They don't actually
Okay.
call it hold harmless. That would just make our life easy. Then we could find it. They call it something really random. Maria, do you remember what they call it? It's something. I wish I remembered what they call it.
I asked Rachel if she could get into that folder.
Yeah. I'll
Okay.
look for it again,
Never
but
mind.
it's not called hold
Okay.
harmless, but I'll find it for you. But it basically states, it's a Florida Bar Association form. It says that we recommend you do these things. And then it says, are you going to do them or you're not going to do them? And they have to make an election whether or not they choose to do it. But it's you saying in that form that we're recommending that you're doing that. And then the buyer has to select which one they're choosing to do. But it's just one extra way. So we have our piece of recommendations and disclosures, then we have the Florida Bar one. So it's like we've said, hello, hello, and then they haven't done it. So this way they can't come back to us and say, how'd you let me do that? Hello, we've said three
Okay.
times here. Yeah, it's that.
All right.
Especially if it's ever been, if you're selling orange groves. Especially recently with the implications with the way we fertilize orange groves over the last 100 years, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Great point. Absolutely true. Yeah, there's so many things. I mean, I have seen in Naples, for example, that the natural fauna, Florida, blah, 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 so dense, you can't see unless you've really like inspected that property with a machete, right? You can't see what's been put behind that. And so if you're buying a large parcel, you don't know what's maybe encumbered in there. Maybe you took a helicopter or something, but most people that are buying this land don't do that. If they're trying to do that quickly, and then they get in there and they try to clear it and they realize, oh my God, I had no idea what the heck I just bought. And that's the problem. So that's why I'm just saying you have to be super careful. Like we're constantly watching, the 5 acres that my father-in-law has. The neighbor keeps trying to push over and encroach on our property. Very annoying. So,
Oh, and the number of times when they find out they didn't know that grandpa sold the mineral rights, the air rights, they don't know what their ancestors have done. They don't know what their parents did.
exactly. Exactly right. So these are all things you got to be super careful of. Good point. Okay. So, but I would also say that in your point, Maddie, if they want to have a survey, why not go into contract and just do this particular paragraph F? Because that's what this paragraph does. It makes it based upon the survey. Talk to Linda, Susan Abshire about that. Because Susan Abshire
Okay.
does this all the time. She does a lot of, she's my large landlady. She does. Poor thing, that's what I call her.
What you might want to change that nickname there, Carrie. Land investors are the same as any other investor. Just because when you first start talking to them, they sound like they know what they want to do, and even though they're sophisticated, they don't understand our contracts. They don't know that clause exists. And once you sit down and you point out to them, look, this is for your benefit. I can do this. I can protect you. This is strategic. Look at what I can do for your benefit. They'll go, oh, I didn't know I could do that. They've probably bought 20 parcels. They don't even know this clause exists and it's for their benefit.
Exactly.
You'll be a hero.
Great point. And they'll continue to use you, which is a really important thing. So great point. Okay, so time for acceptance. This is exactly like, this is not the effective date of the contract. This is saying that this offer is valid until, same thing as ours, right? The effective date of this contract is the date. This is interesting. I don't know why we don't say this in the other contract, but it would be great. The effective date of this contract is the date on which the last one the seller or buyer has signed, initialed, and delivered this offer to the final counteroffer. Isn't that awesome? That they actually, I don't know why they break it out in a land contract, but they don't say it in a residential contract. I think that's hysterical. They just figured land people don't know, but residential people should. I don't know, but I just think it's awesome that they put it in there. But that is exactly very cool. The closing date is on no or before. Please do not write in on or before because it's not there for a reason. unless specifically extended by other provisions of the contract. So same thing. Obviously, we know that it just says the closing date will prevail over all time periods, including but not limited to the financing and due diligence periods. Meaning that if they wrote the due diligence period beyond the closing still will happen before that. So be careful with that. Sometimes people do get a little bit sly and they'll put the due diligence period beyond the closing date. It doesn't mean that the closing date the closing date still will prevail, just so you're aware. Okay. Also, notice that, which is really weird because they changed it in the residential, but they did not change it here. They still have kept it to 5 p.m. on the land contract. Isn't that bizarre? I loved the 5 p.m. change that they made in the residential contract, but they took that out. So time in a residential contract is 11:59 p.m. Time in a land contract is 5 p.m. So as says, however, if the closing date occurs on a Saturday, Sunday, or national holiday, it will extend to 5 p.m. the next business day. Isn't that interesting? I know. In the event the insurance underwriting is suspended on closing date, the buyer is unable to obtain the property insurance. Buyer may postpone the closing for up to 5 days after the insurance or underwriting is lifted. What is that? It's just like the force majeure right there, right? If the transaction does not close for any reason, the buyer will immediately return all seller provided documents and other items. Interesting that they all rolled that into closing. Very weird. Extension of closing. It says that this is having to do with if the funds from the buyer's lender are not available due to the CFPB, this is the same thing, then you have up to 10 days. So that's again, if there's a loan and they didn't get the closing disclosure in time, right? I mean, not to closing, but they got it before the closing date. They have up to 10 days for the buyer to be able to read the closing disclosures, which they only need 3 days. Okay, financing, same thing. Buyer will pay cash, no financing contingency. Doesn't mean they can't get a loan, same thing, right, guys? It just means it's not contingent on that. Everybody good with that? Okay, now this contract is contingent on buyer qualifying and obtaining a commitment or an approval, which I think is really weird. Specified below within after the effective days, 30 days, same thing. The buyer will be applying for financing within blank days after the effective days, so 5 days, same thing. And will provide any and all credit, employment, financial, and other information required by the lender. Interesting. If buyer, after using due diligence and good faith, cannot obtain financing within the financing period, either party may terminate the contract. You know what's interesting, though? They didn't talk about anything about the appraisal, did they? It's like they didn't add that part in, which is bizarre. New financing. The buyer will secure a commitment for a third-party financing for however much percentage of the purchase price or dollar amount. And then it talks again about the rate or same kind of thing, right? And then it says based upon the buyer's creditworthiness, same thing. The buyer will keep the seller or broker fully informed of the loan status, and the lender and the mortgage broker to disclose the information to the seller or broker. That's the same thing right out of our contract. Or the seller will do seller financing, and the buyer will execute a first or a second purchase money note in the amount of, so either maybe they'll get a first and then the seller will provide the second, or maybe the seller will provide the first and they'll get a second. And then this talks about how that works, right? And if the buyer defaults, the buyer will give the right to prepay without the penalty, blah, blah, blah. And then the mortgage assumption, which is the same amount of ours. Assignability, the buyer may assign and thereby be released. The buyer may not assign but be released, and the buyer may not assign. Same thing, okay? Title,
Carrie,
yes.
I have a question regarding the owner financing.
Yes.
Is that not recommended to go through an attorney to do anything like that? Like I've never.
I would, an attorney or a
Okay.
mortgage broker. You don't, we do have addendas for that, but depending on how complicated it is, you don't want to be the one doing that, right? So again, we have
Correct.
forms for that they can just fill out, but if it gets complicated, if it's very simple, it's like 3 years, they're going to put so much down, they're going to pay so much every month, and then there's a balloon payment. You could just use our forms for that, which we have seller financing addendas written by Florida bar attorneys. That's fine. But a lot of times they're much more complicated than that. And then in that case, I would use an attorney or a mortgage broker.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Carrie,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
You said that the appraisal contingency isn't built into this contract like it is in residential. So does that
Yeah.
mean that we would need an appraisal contingency addendum with land contracts?
Well, it's really weird because, it's not here. So,
Right.
I mean, there's so much more to land than the appraisal, though. I mean, more of that is really, hold that question, and I'm going to tell you why. We're going to get to the diligent effort part, and that's probably where you'd be covered more than anything anyway. But it is bizarre because they did so much, they mirrored so much like our other contract, but they don't have anything in here about
Right.
appraisal, which is bizarre. So, but let me hold that question for 2 seconds. But we'll go back to it. We'll circle back, I promise. Okay. Then it says here that the seller has legal capacity to convey marketable title, which, is really questionable if it's a scam. And then let's just cover this: statutory warranty, special warranty, and other. I get this question all the time. Statutory warranty is the one we all want. That is the full regular, that's the full enchilada deed, okay? Special warranty, that's the one you usually get from a builder, all right? Other could be, please do not do a quick claim deed, but that could be what you're putting down there, okay? That's the one you want to avoid. You need to know what kind of deed you're getting. It's important because you can't just automatically select this. How do you know? Anybody? How do you know what kind of deed you're going to get?
Depends on how they want to take title.
Know this. What was that?
It's going to depend on how they want to take titles. Are they married, not married? Is it a partnership, LLC, et cetera? You're going to have to ask the questions. They're going to have to seek advice, and that's conversation.
And you also have to see how it was recorded initially, because if they took a special warranty deed, you can't get it to a statutory warranty deed.
It's
So you
not
have
a
to
simple
look
answer.
at the first original way it was recorded and then have the conversations. Exactly. That's what you were going to say. I knew it. So it was kind of a tricky question. Yes. Thank you. Excellent. All right. So, and then title evidence. This is important. The party who pays for the owner's title insurance policy will select this is very similar. Will select the closing agent and pay for title search, including tax and lien search. And then it says if performed, and all other fees you can select here. Okay. The seller will deliver to buyer either who's going to pay for it, the seller or the buyer's expense, within how long before or after the closing date? Right here. At least before the closing date, not after the closing date. Hello. Sorry. And then
Isn't it customary though, aside from like Miami Broward, that the owner's title policy is paid by the seller?
well, I will tell you that if I was doing this and it was a big deal, I would have my buyer do it so that I could be holding the money, because whoever pays holds the money. And in my opinion, if whoever holds the money has all the power. So definitely in all commercial deals and any kind of big development deal, I would make sure my buyer was the one in control of the money. So that is my personal preference. If I was representing the customer, you have to let them know that they're going to have to pay their own titles insurance, but who cares, right? An owner's policy. If it's a lot of money, you're in the millions and they're dealing with a development, I don't know any developer who's going to allow the seller to hold that money.
No one.
The builder, they're not letting anybody hold their money. Tell you that right now. But if you're dealing with an individual and it's a smaller parcel, yeah, traditionally, to your point, Maddie, it's very normal that it would be like the seller. But in large parcels and big business, like we have a deal going on with D.R. Horton right now. D.R. Horton's holding their money. Trust me on that one. They're not letting anybody hold that money. So it's going to be dependent upon the deal, the size of the deal, who the players are, for sure. But if I'm representing somebody in a large deal, I'm going to recommend that they hold their money personally. Now they choose, right? But why would you do that? Guys, if you got a large escrow deposit in there, which these usually are, and there could be situations where certain money is going to go hard at certain times and it gets very complicated. You want that money in anybody's hands but somebody that you trust? I wouldn't.
No.
Very simple. I mean, Max, did you ever let anybody have your money?
No.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
No.
my first wife.
See, and how'd that go?
Yeah, right, exactly.
So moving on. Okay. Now here's an important thing. There's two things that you can get. You can either get title insurance or an abstract of title. Now there's a difference here. Title insurance is a company. Let me explain. An abstract of title can only be done by an attorney, and they go back and they review the ownership of that property from the beginning of time. So that's what they're doing. They're saying this parcel was initially owned by Mr. and Mrs. blah blah blah, and then it was transferred hands to here. That's what they're doing. They're studying the ownership of that that land from the beginning of time. That's the abstract of title. The title insurance doesn't do that. Basically, they look at it, they kind of get an overview, but they don't do it to the depth of an abstract of title. And they basically give you an insurance policy that says, if anybody comes after, and again, it's based upon the type of title you have, the type of deeds you have, but if anybody comes after your property, we're going to give you a policy that says you have this property. We'll pay you if somebody tries to steal it from you or claims it from you. That's the difference. Okay. So in regular real estate, homes, everybody always gets title insurance, right? Why would you not? But oftentimes what I have found, especially when I did big parcels, a lot of times they do abstract of title in land because you really want to know who has owned it for a multitude of reasons, because you want to know also what was done to that land. So oftentimes I've seen a lot of abstract of titles. So it just depends on who you're dealing with. And oftentimes too, because, my sellers would usually always deal with the same attorneys. And so those attorneys would have processes that they would do. But a lot of times the attorneys that we dealt with, they had their own specialists that did zoning. They had their own specialists that did engineering. So it was a whole legal law firms that I would deal with, and they did abstracts of title. Those were the ones that I dealt with, especially Miami, God help us. So, but again, it's going to depend. Maria, what have you found? What have your people typically done?
Yeah, always abstract, which got really actually fascinating when you got into the old
Ownership.
Spanish deeds, and
Yeah.
if you enjoyed the history at all. So
Yeah, it
anything
is
up around St.
interesting.
Augustine, especially.
Yeah, totally interesting. So I would say, I've always done that in land, abstractive titles, but if you're doing like a little parcel that's in a community, you could probably just do title insurance. You're just buying a lot in a community that people have already been developing in. There's other builders buying a lot. You probably could just do title insurance. But if you're buying a big parcel of land, I would recommend probably an abstractive title. But
There
again,
was so much extra liability there that they were trying to prevent, especially when you're dealing with the big developers. They wanted to know what was going to
oh yeah,
potentially come up from that
developers.
usage that was going on back then.
Yeah, developers are definitely going to require, I'm sure, an abstracted title. But like on, your little mom and pop one. Now, your would-be pretend developers, they're not going to know the difference, and they're going to look to you to say, I don't know, what do you suggest? I would say suggest the abstract. But then you have to have a good title company. Well, that's again, who is holding the money? So it's going to be the buyer paying for that. And, so that's what I'm going to say. You want to make sure you have
And
good.
it's not cheap.
No, an abstracted title is not cheap, but that's why I can't be like
But it's worth every penny.
would be a developer, right? Exactly. They have to be real. And that's why a lot of people want to pretend that they're developers, but they don't know what they're doing. They don't have the money. And worse, when they don't have the money to buy the land and they want you to find somebody to buy the land. That's even worse. I see a lot of those people. So, okay. Title examination. Let's move on. So after the receipt of the title evidence, the buyer will, within 10 days or no later before closing, deliver written notice to the seller if there's defects. This is very similar to our contract. And then the seller has a certain amount of time. He has usually within 30 days to cure that. And if they cannot, then they have time frame to try to cure it that they can extend. And if they can't, then the buyer can get out and get their money back, right? The survey. Buyer may, at buyer's expense, have the property surveyed and must deliver written notice to the seller within 5 days after receiving the survey, but no later than 5 days before closing, of any encroachments on the property. Encroachments by the property's improvements on other lands or deed restrictions or zoning violations. Any such encroachment or violation will be treated in the same manner as a title defect. That's why it's so important. And the seller and buyer's obligations will be determined in accordance to that. So if you've got somebody who is encroaching on your property, that means you have less ownership rights to that property. That's why it's the same thing as, you really don't have the whole deed, right? Because you're not buying the whole thing anymore. So this is why if someone says they don't want to have a survey, well, dear God, you just waived all your rights. You see what I'm saying, Maddie? That's where the problem comes from. That's the
Right.
deal. So, because that's a lot of times, or zoning violations. There could be zoning violations on that property, and oh my God, that could cost you tons of money because back to fines. Oh, we had this one property. Oh my God, their back to fines were like $250,000. The original fine was like 50, but because they supposedly didn't know about it, again, supposedly, it just kept accruing and accruing. It was $250,000 back to fines. Try to sell that. It was like more than the property was worth. It was ridiculous. So these are the things you got to know about. And then, of course, where did they find it out? When they did the survey. But the seller, oh, what? I have back to, yeah, yeah. We're on the buy side. We're like, oh, sure, right. You didn't know. Yeah. This is my point, guys. This is why you cannot, in my opinion, ever let someone buy without a survey. But anyway, now here's Rachel. This is the part I was talking about. This is what's really different. It's the due diligence period. This is very important. And usually they are like at least 30 days. It depends on how large the land is. I've seen them go, I mean, months. It just depends on what you're buying, right? But this is what happens, okay? During the due diligence period, this is the buyer in the buyer's sole discretion, absolute discretion, determines whether the property is suitable for the buyer's use. Okay, so imagine if you're getting financing, who cares about the appraisal, right? It's more, can you use this property as you intend it to be used for? More than if it's really worth what you're paying for it, right? Because yes, there's a price tag on it, but if I can't build what I want to build on it, does it even matter? Right. So I think that this is why this is even more important. So here's what it is. Now, the buyer may conduct phase 1, which is the environmental assessment, and any test analysis and surveys that the buyer deems necessary to satisfy the property's engineering, architectural and environmental, zoning restrictions, subdivision statutes, soil and grade, availability to access to public roads, water, other utilities, consistency with state, local, and regional growth management plans. Like, okay, they're going to put a PUD in here and you really can't do what they wanted to do. Availability of permits, government approvals, licenses, and other inspections that the buyer deems appropriate. If the property must be rezoned, how many times we see that all the time? The buyer will obtain the zoning from the appropriate government agencies. The seller will sign all documents that the buyer is required to fill. Then the seller gives the buyer and its agents, assigns the right for them to do this during the due diligence period. Okay. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So here's the thing. There's a whole zoning addenda too that you can do, but let's say you need to rezone the property. Guys, zoning takes forever. And even if, let's say it's in the future land use, and this is why you have to understand, you might be zoned agricultural, and it does have in the future land use that you could go to a PUD, a planned urban development, right? But maybe that particular county or wherever it's located requires a public hearing to do so. God help you. Because, first of all, that's a crapshoot. And it could take 6 months just to even get in front of the public hearing. And then if the public hearing goes bad, you didn't have it. So oftentimes these diligent periods can go on and on and on. So it just depends on what's happening during the, so is it a soil? And there's a phase 1, a phase 2, there's multiple phases depending on what needs to be done. Like if you find in the phase 1 that your soil doesn't perk, or God help you, you find that you have some kind of like, oh God, Indian artifacts, you just run. I mean, there's just nothing you can do with that. Or you find you have some turtles. Oh God.
Yeah, if there's turtles, forget it. We're done.
We're done, right? We're done. Some people say you can move them. Yeah, whatever. Good luck with that. Yeah.
Not if anybody knows about it.
So there's a turtle lady in Tallahassee, right? Someone who's in charge of all the turtles. Right?
We love her. Thank you,
Yeah.
turtle lady. But
Yeah.
there's so many things. Actually, with Zenline, we were going to buy property along the water, and that's what we found. There were turtles. And we're like, do not touch that property. Yep, turtles. We ran from that property, but we were going to build a beautiful development. And we spent so much money during due diligence until we found that there were turtles. And we were like, oh dear
All
God.
for tortoises. Yep.
Oh, horrifying.
And
Horrifying.
scrub jays.
Oh, Yeah, there's just so many things that you can find here in Florida, but if you find Indian artifacts, that's a kiss of death. You just, it's just like the worst. Or a cemetery. Oh, forget it. So
But with turtles and even scrub jays, there is mitigation.
so
There is.
expensive though.
But
So
the time frame is the point. So
yeah, and honestly, you have to have the rate of return. That land price has to be good enough, and what you can build, and there's just so many factors there. Let me tell you, it's a mess. Yeah, I was in every
but
one
it,
of
it all
the
comes
meetings.
down to the size of the contract. And to Rachel's point, what she's asking, and yes, Rachel, for the little ones that we might be doing, yeah, we're going to have that addendum in place because it's probably tied to a hard money loan, and they're probably doing something. What we would be looking at, we would add it because we'd be tying it to a hard money loan. So yes, we would do it. But for the bigger ones that Carrie's mentioning, they probably wouldn't need it. So it's
Yeah,
going to be
because
case
they're
by
gonna.
case for the overall
Yeah,
conversation.
and in the larger developments, sometimes it needs an approval of a DRI, a Development of Regional Impact study
Yeah.
that has to be done and approved.
Exactly. So there's just, and this is the thing, guys. I don't say all this to scare you for sure. Yeah, Emily?
Are there companies that do the phase 1? phase 2?
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Engineering.
Do they
Yeah.
do the
No.
land use all
That's
of
specialty.
Yes. What you really want to do is get a firm. Oftentimes, if there's a builder who's going to handle it, they already have all those people in place,
Yeah.
right? But if it's a would-be developer who comes to you, this is what I love. I love them when they come to me. I've had so many of these meetings. Carrie, we want you to do all of this. And I laugh and I say, that's so cute. No, you have to hire who's going to be building your building. Oh, well, we thought you would get somebody. Oh, no. Means that you don't know what the heck you're doing. You're dreaming. Okay. A real developer already knows, they already know who's going to, like a lot of developers don't do the development. They just do, vertical. They just do the actual building. They don't want to do anything of land development. And I get that. Their land development in and of itself is tough. But that means that you got to get with a land developer who does that. And you have to get with soil engineers. You have to get with an engineering company who will do that because you still need an engineering company to do your grading. You need an engineering company to do your lot fit studies. So you need people to do that anyway. And if you don't know those people, that means you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. They already have their list.
Yeah. And if they don't have their list because they're not from the area, they would know the people to put on their list. They would be asking the right questions. So if someone comes to you and wants you to do it, that means run and hide from those people. They're not real land people. They don't know what they're doing. So if they just have money to spend, that's great. So you can put them with a company that is looking for investors, but they are not the ones who should be doing the development because they don't know what they're
Don't
doing.
waste your time until after they spend the money on those people.
Yes. No, because they don't know what they're doing. Okay. Now, no due diligence period. This is very scary in a land contract. The only time I might agree and allow a customer to do this without me like running and hiding is, let's say they're buying in a community that's already pre-developed and they're just selling individual lots and it's already, the lot fits already done. That would maybe be fine, right? You already know what they could build. They already know. They're just buying the lot and the developer is just going to be building it for you. That's fine because oftentimes a lot of custom builders will sell the land and then build the house for them. And so there's two different contracts. You have a land contract and then you have the new home build contract. So that would be fine because it's all together. But I still say usually that they have their own contracts, but also be very careful of what they're going to be saying in terms of what they're going to be warranting, like with Elements case and that what community that I can't remember right over on Winter Garden Island, Conroy Windermere Road there, where they don't even warranty the percolation. That's a little scary, right? Because it's bad over there. All right, government.
It could be perfectly safe and legal, but still, there's no, say the perk test comes back bad because we're in the wet season and now they have to have Mount Flushmore because the drain field's got to be 5 foot up and they just don't like the look.
Yeah.
And they yell at me and I get sued.
Exactly.
Technically, it works.
Happens. That is,
but it looks bad.
Exactly. Yeah. And we get blamed for all of that. How we get blamed, I really don't know, but we do. So that's just how.
We do. Yeah.
So
I still don't like that clause.
Yeah, I hate it too. I really hate it. Government regulations, obviously, it means that the regulations and levels of service which affect the buyer's intended use of the property will not be grounds for terminating this contract. So you have to be very careful that that's all looked at during the due diligence period. You can't find out later and go, oh, well, I didn't know that the government had these regulations on this. Well, you should have, because that all should have been done. Due diligence period has got to cover everything. It's your cancel for any reason clause, and you cannot miss anything during that period. Flood zone, the buyer's advised to verify with the survey and the lender if there's anything in the flood zone, because guess what, again, you can't find out later. It has to happen during diligence, during the diligence period. Coastal
But
construction.
Carrie, we're in the middle of the state. There's no flood zones in the middle of the state, right? We're
Of
not at the
course
beach.
not. Right. That's why we're all required to have the flood disclosure now, right? Throughout the whole state of Florida. Imagine.
But
Okay.
most of our buyers aren't from Florida. They don't get it. So
I have no idea. Closing costs, very similar, guys. Right here, the sellers, the buyers, all that's the same. Prorations, it's the same thing. Special assessments by public body. Regarding special assessments imposed by the public body, the seller will pay, and you have to say, the full amount of liens that are certified, confirmed, and ratified before closing, the amount, the last estimate of the assessment, if improved, is substantially complete as of the effective date and has not resulted in a lien before closing. The buyer will pay all amounts after. Now, if the special assessments are paid in installments, is it the seller or the buyer? You have to select. Okay? Be very careful not to miss that, but it does say seller will pay assessments in full at the time of closing. It says if the seller is checked, the seller will pay installments, but it doesn't say if left blank. So if you leave a blank and there are assessments, we don't know what's going to happen because you didn't make an election.
Oh, it's gonna be the buyer.
Oh, you're right, buyer if left blank. Oh, thank you. I didn't even notice that. So be very careful. You're representing the buyer. Thank you. I didn't even notice that.
That's your-
Property
hey,
tax.
Carrie,
Yeah.
Carrie, will you go back up? Because we have some of our team has been selling on the coast. Will you go
Oh.
back up to the coastal line?
Sure. Yeah, well, I hate that part. Okay, if any part of the property lies seaward of the coastal construction control line as defined by Florida statutes, the seller will provide the buyer with an affidavit or survey as required by law, delineating the line's location on the property, unless the buyer waives this requirement in writing. So the property is being purchased may be subject to coastal erosion and to the federal, state, or local regulations that govern that coastal property, including the delineation, the rigid coastal protection structures, the beach nourishment, the protection of marine turtles. Have fun with that. Additional information can be obtained from Florida Department of Environmental Protection, including whether there are significant erosion conditions associated with the shoreline. But also, remember, if you check here, this says that the buyer waives their right to receive that. Now, you want to make sure, again, if you are in that area, that you're getting that survey, because you have to know what you have to pay for and you have to be responsible for. Sometimes they're even making them do those seawalls, which is very expensive. So you have to know if that's something that you're going to be responsible for. The other thing is, and to your point, Maria, if you're buying on the West Coast and now you have the FEMA situation with the impact from the hurricane, and now you're waiting, did they even receive a letter from FEMA telling them how much their property is worth and how much they can improve it for? What's the percentage they can improve it for? And are there look backs? Do you have to wait for a time frame to improve it? That is very important. You have to stay within all of those rules, because you could be selling a property and the people can't even improve that property. So you need to make sure you understand exactly where you're selling that property. Do not play around, especially on the West Coast right now by Tampa, Indian Rocks, St. Pete Beach, where anybody has had any damage from the hurricane, unless you completely understand all of that. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Maria McKee will be happy to answer, because she understands it very well. Sorry, Maria.
And that's where riparian rights come in as well.
True. Good point.
Under
And by
B.
the way, MLS has some weird fees over there too. So just something else to know. So if you want to play around on the West Coast, good luck. I wish you luck, but you better contact us all, because it's a big mess over there right now. Would you agree with that, Maria?
Yeah, and be very careful with the beach replenishment, because that's becoming a really dangerous issue right now with a lot of the beach properties right now. And if you're over that coastal line, a lot of the listing agents are checking that box and sending it over pre-checked. So be
Waiving
very,
it?
very careful, just like they do on the HOA box and the condo
I
box,
hate that.
pre-checking it. So just double check before you have your buyer
He's
sign.
saying that the listing agents are pre-checking, they're waiving their right to receive the survey about the coastal protection area, so you won't even know. Because they don't want
Hoping
to,
you'll sign it.
just like the
Which is
condo
crazy.
writer, like they're saying that you've
Right,
received it.
right.
Yes. Uh-huh. Sneaky, sneaky, horrible.
Can you ask for them to?
Oh, yeah, you just uncheck it. Do not sign it. Just
Yeah.
take that away. Yeah, exactly.
We're
So,
talking hundreds of thousands of dollars of liability to your buyer if you don't catch that and
yeah.
you've had them sign that.
Yeah, and guess who they're going to come after? You. Horrible. Okay, property tax disclosure. The most important thing to understand when it's vacant land and then when they approve it, or when they just changes hands. Remember, if that thing has been ag and then you change to zoning to PUD, I mean, your taxes are going to change tremendously. So you just really need to understand that your taxes are going to be completely different than they have been paying as the seller. So you have to check with the governing body of wherever the land is to get an idea of what the taxes could be. Do not rely on whatever that seller has been paying, for sure. FERPTA also applies whether it's vacant land or whether it's an improved property. It's the same thing. You see a lot of 1031s in vacant land, so make sure you're aware of how the 1031 works, and if not, we can talk about that. Also, computation of time, calendar days is used except for periods of 5 days or less. Totally random. So this contract is different than our residential. All periods in a residential contract are calendar days, but here less than 5 days. So let's say you put something in there that's 5 days or less. Now they're going to time periods of 5 days or less will be computed without including Saturday or Sunday, which is like a business day, right? So that's pretty weird, but they're not calling it business days, but they're saying you're not going to count in the counting Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday. Yeah, I know. Very weird. So just so you know, other than time of acceptance for the effective date, any other time periods or dates in this contract or pre-written herein shall extend Saturday, Sunday, up till 5 p.m. Again, it's the 5 p.m. So the differences in this contract versus residential, again, if it's 5 days or less, they don't count in Saturday, Sunday, or the legal holiday when they're counting. Totally random. Everything other than that is calendar. And which is so weird, it ends at 5 p.m., which I really like, but they've taken that out of all our residential. Okay. Risk or loss of eminent domain. This is important. If any of the portion of the property is material damaged by casualty before closing, or seller negotiates with a governmental authority to transfer all or part of the property in lieu of eminent domain proceedings, then the seller will promptly inform the buyer, and they can either person can terminate the contract. That is important because a lot of times eminent domain proceedings can take forever. And so this might have been something that was going on and they didn't know that it was happening because maybe they talked about it a while ago. And then the school board comes back and says, yeah, we're going to do the eminent domain thing. So maybe the seller didn't even know it was a thing anymore. So this is why you just need to understand that. Force majeure, same kind of thing we talked about. It's in there. All notices have to be in writing. We already know that. Complete agreement. This is a complete agreement. Okay, default resolution is the same. Attorney's fees and costs. If there is any litigation, the prevailing party is entitled to receive that. So that's interesting. That's another one. Obviously, professional advice, broker liability, same thing. Commercial Real Estate Sales Commission Lien Act. This is different. If the property is commercial and not residential, then the Florida Commercial Real Estate Commission Lien Act provides that when a broker has earned the commission by performing licensed services under a brokerage agreement, the broker may claim a lien against your net sales proceeds for their commission. The broker's lien rights under this act cannot be waived. So if they fail to pay our commission, if it's a commercial property, we can put a lien on their property, which Premier might do, but we cannot do it if it's residential. Everybody good on that? So, and then it says who's the brokerage is right here. We already know about that. This is the same kind of thing, right? And then this is where the addendas go, right here. Back up. Now, other would be your compensation agreements. Again, we do not write into additional terms anything about compensation. It's the addendas that we add on here. Buyer broker to seller broker, seller to buyer broker, right? This is where we add those addendas. FF, if you want to add FF, this is where we're adding that in. We never write into additional terms unless it's something about the seller and the buyer. The seller agrees to give the buyer XYZ money towards the buyer's closing costs, which may be used for a commission, right? But it doesn't say anything about us. Additional terms should have nothing to do with agents, buyers, or listing agents. Shouldn't talk about us. The other is where we include in the addendas that refer to the compensation. Yes.
Also add seller pays line or buyer pays?
No,
Don't need to add it?
no. You put it only here. You're incorporating it into the contract by putting it into other. It only needs to be incorporated one time. Everybody clear on that? This again talks about attention buyer and seller. This is about us not being able to work with the 7 types of people that are from other parts of the world. And that's it. So we covered a lot today. I feel pretty good about it. Everybody feel pretty good about it? We went a little over. Sorry about that. We did, but any questions? All right, guys. So on Thursday, Miss Claire in Lake Nona, which I'll be joining halfway in, but I have a meeting halfway. We'll be doing our Moxie Presents. Woohoo! So very excited. So join us in Lake Nona or on Zoom to go over how to use our newest awesome tool, Moxie Presents. So see you guys soon. Bye.
Hi.
Thank you. Bye.